Welcome to the Essential Tax Podcast with your host, Mishkin Santa. In each episode, we'll take the complex world of tax, all the jargon, acronyms, and stuff that make your eyes glaze over, and explain it in an impactful way to understand the complex and unknown areas. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, thewolfgroup.com. Now, here's the host of Essential Tax Podcast, Mishkin Santa.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast today. This is our third installment of the 2025 tax season mental and physical health update. I'm a big believer in both. I've been doing this. This is my 22nd tax season. And as you've heard maybe other podcasts, I've always talked about the fact that that people should take really good care of their mental and physical health, especially in the accounting and tax industry. I'm so excited to have Amy Vetter on the podcast today. Amy, why don't you just quickly tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, just so that our audience can get familiar with who you are.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me. I am a CPA and a yogi, so I bring it together at the B3 Method Institute, which is business plus balance equals bliss. And we use that model in the work that we do as keynote speaking, training, doing firm retreats, and workshops and coaching.
So Amy's my hero. I saw Amy speak at the CCH conference in Las Vegas in October of 2024. And when she said, I'm a CPA and a yogi, I was like, oh my goodness, how can I be that? And then, you read her profile and she's giving TED Talks and she's got her podcast. And I'm like, this is what I'm trying to do in my space. But I thought her presentation was so powerful. I said to myself, I've got to get her on the podcast, especially because of the way that she came up through the Big Four and then transitioned into what she's doing today. And I think her story is so interesting. So let's talk about that first, and then we'll talk about what you're doing with the B3 method and your podcast and work-life harmony. And then we'll get into the questions that I have for you about the mental and physical health stuff. So tell us about, your background, how you came up as a CPA, why you decided to transition into what you're doing today. I think that's a super interesting story for the audience.
Yeah, so I definitely did not know when I started out as a CPA that I'd ever be doing this. So definitely over time, it has been pivots in my career and just noticing the shifts in myself and opportunities and deciding, which way to go. And so I really started the traditional route. Like you said, I started in Big Four. It was Big Six at the time. Okay. Might be saying my age a little bit. And then started in audit and eventually went into internal audit at a Fortune 500 company. And then decided to start my own practice. And, there's what's called client advisory services today. It wasn't a thing then. So it was really like fractional controllership, CFO. I had bookkeepers and really loved that because it was what I would call like making house visits where doctors used to make house visits. It was kind of like that from the accounting side of really trying to solve people's problems and help translate accounting. I ended up merging into a firm and becoming a partner later on in South Florida. And really through that journey, when I became partner was kind of this moment where everything came together because I've been driving so hard in my career and never really thought about, is this my purpose? Is this the thing that I want to be doing? And so forth. And I just wanted to get to partner. And when I got to partner, I really had that moment in my life where everything kind of stopped and was like, wait, what am I going to do now? What are my goals? Where am I going from here? And never thought about like, once you reach that point, then what? So, started on this path. It was kind of like a perfect storm where I had becoming partner. I had my second child. I had gotten sick from the pregnancy. And the only thing that I was allowed to do was yoga. And I wasn't allowed to do any other physical activity. And like you, I like fitness. Mm-hmm. And so I started yoga out of necessity. And through that process, started really noticing my energy and how I felt, and also the emotions that were coming up for me as well, that I wasn't used to letting come up for me. And through that process, really started evolving and deciding, not to quit, because I had tons of experience. I loved my clients. I loved what I did. I loved the value of the work that I did. But how did I need to shift and pivot my life in order to find what I call bliss now, but more happiness or joy or fulfillment in the work that I was doing in myself, and recognizing that it's not a guilty thing to need to feel good personally, and take time for that. And so through that journey, I ended up eventually, years later, writing this book, Business Balance and Bliss, and deciding to go full into it and really trying to help people be able, like you said, really think about their mental health, their energy, and how to incorporate that into their workday so that they can be more intentional in how they feel.
Yeah, I mean, from my seat on the bus, because I'm still in the trenches a lot, especially during tax season, I feel like, and the Wolf Group, again, we're just a small subset. We're a small firm. We're only 50 people, but and we're all remote. I think I see a lot of issues floating up from the remote work, the constant head down, the constant interruptions from teams. I call it busy brain, I think is what they call it. I think there's a lot of issues floating through from when we started doing the remote work during the pandemic, and even going through into today. Hybrid work. I know people are doing RTO, return to office, and all that stuff, but I think there's just so many different issues floating around out there. And I feel like as a business owner, someone that's employing all these people, you can't just look past that. You have to be able to recognize that, like you said, they have to feel good while they're doing their work. And I feel like there's a lot of businesses that, especially in the accounting and tax industry, that are not supporting that. It's just like, hey, you've got to hit your metrics. You've got to get your tax returns out. You've got to do whatever it is. We don't really care about the rest. We don't care if you gain 200 pounds or if you're suffering from all these illnesses. It's like, just get it done. And so I'm kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, where I think like, hey, we need to set people up for success, to deal with these things, to recognize when they're having issues, to be able, give them tools to deal with it. So before we get into that, though, I really want to hear more, though, about, just briefly, the work-life harmony, because I listen to your podcast. I'm in the gym. I listen to a lot of podcasts. Awesome. I go really early in the morning, and you have this work-life harmony series. I think the last one you were maybe interviewing some of the folks that work for you. But tell us about that quickly. Tell us about the B3 method, and just, quickly highlight your podcast, because I think it's a pretty powerful podcast. You've done a lot of episodes and gone over a lot of cool topics.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So the podcast is called Breaking Beliefs, and I had a book come out 2 years ago called Disconnect to Connect. And what that book I consider is kind of a prequel to Business Balance and Bliss and Work-Life Harmony. So when I put out Business Balance and Bliss and was talking about these things we can do in our day, exactly, and we'll probably get into it, what you're talking about, Mishkin, is like all these interruptions and what we can do and how we can manage our day. Because the way I look at work-life harmony, it's all through the day, not just after work or before work or wherever we normally think about it. But a question kept coming up is, how did you get there? What happened? And so I wrote this book, Disconnect to Connect, to really talk about the actual work that it takes mentally to shift and to really understand your habits and patterns and where did they come from. So I find, myself, people around me, we use a lot of excuses of we're busy or it's blaming kind of outward for whether we have time to do things or not, instead of actually listening internally and allowing ourselves to sit in the hard stuff sometimes to say, what would it actually take to shift this thought or this habit or pattern that is recurring in my life? And so that book is really about, how do you break generational patterns? How do you break patterns from when you started your career and people told you certain things and you don't realize they're still in your head and you're still saying them? And, to really break those things that don't align with you. And so that podcast is very much about leaders being able to tell their story, and really habits that they created or have been repetitive in their life, and things that have resonated with them and have worked, and things that they've had to shift and why they've had to shift it. So that really is the purpose of that podcast, to realize this is the human condition. Sometimes we can feel very alone in these thoughts and how we're feeling, but we don't always outwardly talk about it and realize the person next to us is feeling the same way.
Absolutely. I think you hit that nail on the head. I think a lot of Americans feel very isolated and alone. And I think that creates a lot of mental health stressors. Let's shift into that, to the mental health stressors. So I remember when I had my first real job in tax, I was working for the IRS in Seattle, Washington.
Wow.
During the dark, it was like the dark period, right? And so you went in, it was dark, and in the IRS offices, it's all dark, and you go in your dark, you're beat down. I was in a little tiny cubicle with a computer that was like 2008, and it was still operating Windows 2000. And I felt like I was actually back in the 80s, where it was like control, run, put the program in. Very antiquated. And I remember there was a guy who had worked there for 30 years, and he said, "Hey, just so it helps you out, you need to get one of those happy lamps." And I'm like, "What does that even mean?" And he's like, "Well, you're not getting any vitamin D and K or whatever it is. You gotta stay. There's no sun coming out. We live in Seattle, and you're in this dark office. You gotta, this is going to help you mentally." And so I got one, and it did help out a lot. And I look back on that like that was the biggest mental health stressor that I had back in 08, 09. Now, these days, I have got a home office and if you can see, if there's a camera behind me, you'd see I've got like 12 computer screens. I look like I'm a day trader. I've got Teams, and I've got my work phone. I've got my my home cell phone. So I've got 2 cell phones. I'm the typical dad that's got the double holster 2 cell phones. There just seems to be a lot of stuff floating around. Talk to me about what you think the biggest mental health stressors are for people in the tax and accounting industry, especially during tax season. And then tell me about ways you would deal with that, or ways you would tell people to maybe help combat that or understand that or get around that.
Yeah, well, I do a lot of coaching with accounting professionals dealing with these things. And one of the things that I hear over and over is the interruptions, right? Mm-hmm. So whether it's interruptions from clients, interruptions from staff, or shifting priorities with someone above you that's, telling you need something right now. And I think what I had one person say one time that I thought was just such a good visual is, they come in the morning, open up their computer and say, "Come at me." So that's not how we want to feel at work, right? Like, no. And so we want to make sure that we're really clear on our priorities for the day. And we've actually structured our day that makes sense for us. And so we really need to think about, number one, these interruptions, in quotes. What are we going to do with those interruptions? And so if we want to shift that from happening, we've got to be really clear on creating focus time in our day to get our own work done. We have to have time where things are not getting interrupted. And it really starts with setting priorities in your day. And so a lot of people don't take that time to say, what are like the 1 to 3 things I have to get done today? right? Not just what keeps coming through, but I've got to make sure at the end of the day, when I look back, I did this. And so setting that priority and then setting focus time on your calendar is really, really important. And guarding that like it's client time, that it's not different. It's just as important to get your own work done than to be available for everyone else. And most people do not expect an answer right away. So for a lot of client questions, when we send client questions, do we get an answer right away? So I think it's okay if we have, a turnaround time of when we're going to answer those emails, because getting distracted actually makes us less productive and we get less work done when we're getting distracted all day. So setting certain times in your day where you're going to go answer those emails or messages, whatever that is, turning on the do not disturb, and setting the right expectations with clients or staff that when I have certain focus times of the day. If you don't hear back from me right away, that's why. It's not personal. So we've got to use our voice. We've got to use communication and be transparent about those things. And I don't think anyone would take offense to that. Everyone understands that. And if it's staff time where staff need to ask you questions, also have certain time of your day where you're blocking it for like office hours or time for questions, because when people are interrupting you and you're working, your mindset is not good. So like you've got to like reset yourself. You're kind of a little frustrated because you're trying to get work done, but you're trying to be understanding to answer a question. And to get your head completely present and focused, it's very hard to get yourself centered and make sure that your full self is there to answer that question and not getting distracted. So really separating out your day for these things are really important. And when you do this, it is a shift in our habits to be able to do this, which is hard. And so we need to predict how we're going to feel when we do it. So if we feel like we've got to get to the bottom of like, why are we so available? What is it? Are we a people pleaser, at the heart of it, that we feel bad if we don't answer someone right away? Then we've got to be really honest with ourselves about it and set ourselves up with the right mantra or intention of like, I'm taking this focus time so that I do show up better for my clients or for my staff. And I need to write it down, have it in front of me so that I can keep remembering that when I take that, so I can start training my brain that it's okay to do these things.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. I think when it hit home for me is I was out with my son who's 8 years old, and he was talking to one of his friends, and they were like talking about what their parents did. And my son goes, yeah, my dad, he takes phone calls. That's what my dad does. He takes phone calls all day. I'm like, I don't take phone calls. Well, yeah, I do take phone calls all day, but that's not my job. I do so much more than that. And I think when you're talking about that mind shift there, what's the statistic now? Teams interrupts every 6 minutes, right? And you're constantly interrupted. So that mind shift that you're talking about, like I literally will turn off my Teams. I'll put my cell phones in the other room. And because I'm, being a knowledge worker, that's really what we are in the tax and accounting industry. Those interruptions are killer. They can lead to doing the tax return incorrectly. They can lead to malpractice for consulting. It can be a whole, and then to really, like you said, to get into that is a shift. It's a mind shift. It's a focus. You talked about centering yourself. Do you do any, I've heard some of your podcasts, you guys do breathing exercises, and Lisa Spragna, who came on the last podcast, she actually did some breathing exercises to center ourselves. But is there a way that you kind of, for that particular part, do you do some centering exercises? And then when you shift from, having everything out of your, like those interruptions. So I've got the interruptions out. I've centered myself. I've done the work. And now I'm going to get back into the stuff where there's a lot of stuff coming at me. Is there a different shifting that I should do to go from one to the other? Do you have any recommendations there?
Yeah. So when I wrote my first book, Business Balance Bliss, I did some research, and from all the research I looked at, the optimum way first of all, we want to monotask is what you're talking about. So I'm going to shift from thing to thing rather than trying to multitask, which actually is not more productive.
Correct.
And the way that I can do that is my brain can focus on one thing for 50 minutes. But once I pass that 50-minute mark, I start getting distracted. I start getting diminishing returns on that. So I need a 15-minute break before I restart, either on the same thing or going into a new thing. And during that break, that can be the time that you're answering emails. That can be the time that you get up from your desk and maybe walk and get something to eat, healthy. So planning out the things that you're going to eat during your day, so you're not just grabbing for anything and getting like caffeine that's going to shoot you up and shoot you down, or sugar. And then you can also listen to music that's going to reset your energy if you're tired. Meditation isn't always for everyone, but getting silent and closing your eyes even for 2 minutes can reset your central nervous system. Same thing with breathing exercises. And so what it does is kind of clear out any emotion so that you can reset and be focused on the next thing. If we just keep pushing, our brains are only good for 2 to 6 hours a day. And then we get diminishing returns. So it is, when we're working these long hours, these breaks actually help us to be more productive in the time that we're working. We will actually get more work done when we put these things in place. It's just a matter of understanding the feeling and seeing how your energy shifts when you do it, and that your productivity is higher. But it takes being more regulated in your calendar, your schedule, so that you can do these things and you're really adhering to it, not just saying I'm too busy and there's no way I could do it. There are things we can control and there are things we can't control. We cannot control this is a busy time, but what we can control is the way that we work and the way that we organize our day for the most part. There's always going to be exceptions or emergencies that turn up, absolutely. But if we can get 75% right during our day, we're going to feel a lot better. And to your point, that you're not getting interrupted during your family time, and really protecting that time, that personal time outside of work, so that you can re-energize, feel good about being at work and being at home and not being distracted.
Fantastic points. And I think you brought up a couple of good ones. So I love the, work 50 minutes, then pause, take a break. My personal favorite, and I hesitate to say this on a podcast, but I'm going to say it. I do laundry and I love folding clothes. I always go,
that's meditative.
I want to go work at the Gap, and all I want to do is fold clothes. I don't want to help anyone. I don't want to check anyone out. I just want to fold clothes and make everything look nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's what I do. And then the other thing that you said about you're only good for 2 to 6 hours, it has never been. I think some people will tell me, "Oh, Mish, it was busy season. I worked 14 hours yesterday," and I'm like, "That's not it's not a fact. Like that's not
a badge of honor."
Yeah, that's not a badge of honor.
Yeah,
that's going to ruin your sleep. That's going to, there's a whole cascading effect there. My viewpoint has always been, and people always ask me about this, about what's the one thing that you would do to make yourself better physically. And I always tell people, for me, it's sleep. If I can get 8 hours of sleep, I feel superhuman.
Yeah.
Forget about working out and creatine and sunshine and vitamin D, whatever that. Those are all great, but it's the sleep. To me, the sleep is the most important part. And I think when you start going down that path, and I get that the younger people, those in their 20s and maybe their early 30s, you can do that, but you're just putting so much mileage on your body, and you're getting into a very, very bad habits for your sleep. And I can tell you, my opinion, sleep is the number one thing. Let's port over to the physical stuff, because I'm a big believer in working out. I'm one of those guys that I will go put my feet in the grass for 15 minutes and sit outside and get the sunshine. You're in Fort Lauderdale right now. I'm in Dallas. It's 80 degrees out here. there's a lot of little things I do every day to be physically healthy for tax season and for doing the taxes. Tell me about the biggest physical stressors that you're seeing in the tax industry and ways to combat those.
Well, to your point, I think that's another thing that people will say, especially after busy season, is like, oh, I lost, I gained weight, I didn't eat right, I didn't exercise because it was busy season. And so it has to become a way of life for you, not just working out. And working out isn't always everyone's favorite thing. I feel fortunate that I like to do it. It actually helps me, re-energizes me. I have to start my day that way. My energy is totally different if I don't have time to work out. Like, I'll get up extra early if I have to, just to do something, even if it's for 15 minutes, to move my body before the day starts, because it really does matter for me. But working out, the health benefits, the healthiest exercise to do is walking. So you can do the power workouts and all of that stuff, CrossFit, and that's great if you enjoy that. But if you don't, everyone can walk that is able with their bodies to walk. And so it is important, like, how do you incorporate that into your day at work? So if so, you can do it on a conference call that you don't have to be active on. You can go take a walk while you're on a call and make it part of your day if you don't have time. You can start your day like that or end your day like that. And those are great transitions so that you can kind of clear the day and transition into family life or vice versa, and really get your mindset. And one of the things you can do on a walk, if you're not on a phone call, is a mindfulness practice during your walk, is to really try to get outside of your body and not so much in that monkey mind, where you're trying to listen to, the wind hitting the trees or the birds chirping or whatever it is, maybe cars going by, but start noticing all the sounds around you and being aware of what you're seeing around you and so forth. And that starts taking yourself out of your body. And it allows you to create this awareness that you can bring into the workplace as well. That when we start getting better at being aware of our surroundings, it actually helps us be more aware of how others are feeling and being able to help them too, when we notice things that maybe we wouldn't have noticed if we weren't practicing that with our minds during a mindfulness walk. But physical activity is something 20 to 30 minutes a day that you should be doing, and figuring out where is the best time for it, even if it is during the workday, and how you fit it in.
Yeah, I mean, when I was at the office, I used to go for, I was so corny back in the day. I used to go for inspiration walks and also do conference calls. And we had a really nice little park kind of behind the office. And now what I do is I have a walking pad. Those aren't actually as expensive as they used to be. And so I'll get the standing desk, I'll pop it up, and I'll be on the Zoom call, and you'll see my head kind of pop back and forth, and people understand though. They're like, oh yeah, that's great. That's fine. And you kind of move on. I think that's critically important. And again, maybe I'm oversharing on the podcast today, but I'm getting old. I'm in my mid 40s now. I may not look it, but I'm in my mid 40s. And I have been the victim of the shrimp. You kind of hunch over and you sit for too long. So I do use a back brace for like 30 minutes in the morning, and I find that helps correct the posture. You're not supposed to use it, for very long periods of time, because then your body kind of relies on it. But I think like little things like that have really helped me out a ton with the physical stuff. And then, like I said, I think there's a whole host of other things that you kind of have to figure out what works well for you. I know when I do like a protein shake with creatine first thing in the morning, like that's huge for me. That helps me make better food decisions throughout the day. Whereas if I go straight for the coffee and the blueberry muffin, I'm probably going to want mashed potatoes and gravy all day long. Like it just lead me down the bad path there. So yeah, I can totally see that. let's flip to something else, which I think is really important. Now that we're here in 2025, you know, in the tax world and in the world in general, there's a lot coming at Americans right now. There's a lot, almost every day, whether you open up your news or whatever's going on, doesn't matter what side of the aisle you fall on. There's just so much. It feels like it's just the train is sped up, and there's a lot of stuff coming at us. We kind of focus now in on the tax world, and that also is kind of going gangbusters. So we've got the U.S. tax code that we're currently operating under, which is the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That's going to sunset. We've got a lot of issues with the Internal Revenue Service. Are they going to lose a lot of staff? How do we deal with them if that happens? I think they have. We're talking today on February 6th. I think they have till midnight tonight to accept their buyout offers. We've got, you know, in my space, there's a lot of private equity firms that are constantly wanting to buy our firm. And I think that's happening to a lot of other people. So there's a lot of change. I'm just giving some examples. They're not exhaustive. But how do you deal with this roller coaster of potential change and things that are coming at you? Like, how do you absorb it? Is it just as simple as what Tom Brady used to say, which is control the controllables? Or is there more that we can kind of implement to help us absorb and deal with change?
So, you know, I was going to say the same thing as what you control and what you can't control. What it means is like our brains go from branch to branch to branch. So all those things that you just said is monkey mind, right? Like, what could happen if this happens? What could happen if this happens? And most of our thoughts are untrue. They're made up things that we worry about that could or couldn't happen, but may not be true. Okay. And so it's very important through the process of learning about yourself that we come into awareness of when that is happening for us. Because that can happen throughout the day, just a lot of different calls coming in or different issues coming up, getting worried and so forth. So it is important that, like, the goal is not that you're going to have this perfect work-life balance and this perfect schedule. It's that you can come into awareness of where you are feeling emotion. So am I feeling that in my heart? Am I feeling it in my throat? Am I feeling it in my head? Where am I feeling it? How intense is that emotion for me? And then if I silence myself, and you can have a guided app, meditation app, you know, that if you take a break, that will walk you through meditation. The point of meditation is to observe, not to stop your mind. So a lot of people feel like, oh, because I was thinking, I wasn't doing meditation right. We have thinking minds, so we can't control that part. But what we can control is the observation of the thought. And so when we get silent and we start observing all these thoughts going through our body and how it's making our body feel, it's research. And so what do I need to do to bring myself back into equilibrium so that I'm not shooting up or shooting down, or I start, you know, that conversation that you started with a coworker, and then we just start going down a rabbit hole, you know, and so we start both bringing each other down. So what do I need to do to bring myself back into equilibrium so that I can pull that monkey tail back and not let that mind go from branch to branch to branch? So that might be when I come out of meditation that I'm like, okay, I need to get up and take a walk. I need a break. I might need to move some meetings this afternoon because I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. I could tell from my meditation. And so there's some meetings that are just not a priority, or there's other people on those meetings that could probably take those meetings and I don't need to be on it too, so that I can get some space, clear my mind, and make sure I get some things off my plate so that I'm not feeling so amped up. And then also noticing what are the things that are causing me stress. If I'm listening to the news about all the things that could possibly happen and it's stressing me out, how could I just stop listening to it until it's real?
Right. Right.
And cut certain things out of my life that isn't additive to the energy that I want to create, and it's not intentional to the energy that I want to create, because energy is contagious. So when I'm feeling that way and I start talking that way or coming into a meeting that way, then it's contagious to the people around me and they start taking that in their bodies. So what can I do to be more intentional so that I'm creating the experience I want for myself, but also the people around me?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think once again, you hit the nail on the head. That energy is contagious. I used to see it all the times in meetings where people, you could just tell that they were not doing a good job at internalizing that chaos engine, and it was kind of like spewing out from everything that they were doing. And I've said this before, if again, I don't see the Wolf Group ever going back to doing a return to office, but if we ever did, I would want to try to institute like a midday yoga meditation. Mm-hmm. like a break, like a gap there to help everyone recenter and kind of like, okay, you just had your first half of the day, before we go into the second half, let's pause, let's recenter, let's do some, let's, if you want it, let's recenter.
Yeah.
Well,
you can do it virtually too.
That's
together.
True.
Yeah.
I don't want to rule that out either. So what, when you do a lot of counseling with CPA firms, tax firms, what do you look at? Like, what are some qualities you look at that you would say, okay, this firm's kind of on the right track. They're creating a thriving company culture. They're fitting your definition of that work-life harmony. What are some of the traits that would key you into that? I have the luxury in my job, because I travel a lot. I do a lot of speaking. I do a lot of conferences. I always stop in to other people's firms that I know. Oh, let me stop in. Let me buy you lunch. Let's chat. Let me do a presentation to your staff. I get to see kind of the inner workings of the engine, both in the U.S. and in foreign countries. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you right now, the Australians got it down. They're having a ton of fun. If I were to go to work anywhere, it'd be somewhere in Australia, probably in the Brisbane area. But tell me, what are you looking at for the thriving company culture? What are maybe some key factors that some firms can kind of think about?
So number one, it really starts with leadership. So if the leaders are bought into being open to change and innovation, it's really, really, it bleeds into the culture. If the leaders are saying they are, but not doing it, then the staff know that. And it starts like a battle going on into the organization. And that's really being open to that. Whatever got you here was great, but what's going to get me there is not the same things that got me here. Okay. It's just not. We live in a different world. And so when we hear leadership keep talking about how it used to be, or how they used to be, or they used to think, those aren't great things to be talking about. Because what we need to be talking about is really forward thinking, being open, being transparent about the things that are hard and the things that are good, and bringing everyone along with them. So the best firms that I've worked with are the ones that don't make all decisions behind closed doors, that they're bringing the team along, the emerging leaders, the staff, to give feedback into what are the most important things that they need to be working on as a firm, that they are hyper focused into not working ridiculous hours, that they're figuring out how to spread the work throughout the year, how to price the clients right so that you're not having more clients than you have capacity, that are being innovative with technology and how we are processing the work. And that might be offshoring, that might be AI, all sorts of things, but being very open to the new ways of working so that you can get down to a 40-hour work week year round. It is possible. It takes a lot of work, but it takes being very open and creating innovation within the firm and bringing everyone along with it, and and understanding that the people that are your emerging leaders are the future of the firm. So let them help make these changes. And a lot of these changes that need to be made, the younger generation is more comfortable with a lot of those things. So, it doesn't take away from your leadership if you're not actually the one doing it. It's being the coach so that everybody can be a great team player on the field and be able to make sure that the whole firm is succeeding and being able to achieve the things that they want for themselves, but also that create a better workplace for everyone as well.
Again, fantastic points. I love the sports analogy. I make those all the time. I'm not sure people know what I'm talking about when I say those, but no, I think you hit the nail on the head again. And where I come from, doing 60 hours during busy season, that's just commonplace. Like and that's the way we think. Oh, someone says they only want to work 40 hours during busy season. Like that, normally that's, that we pass on that person. But, that I think has to be revisited. Like, yeah, we can do busy season and we can work 40 to 45 hours, and that is okay. Like we can shift the mindset on that. We can come up with something different. I totally agree with that. I think that we have to sit there and talk. I think anything is possible to make it better. And I think we have to sit down and have honest conversations about not being married to the way it used to be and looking at things that can change for the future. Okay, let's talk about two different types of people in the accounting industry. So let's talk about the old dogs. For example, myself, 20 plus years of experience. How do you, when you're dealing with people like me, what do you say when I come to you and say, look, I'm having a really tough time being motivated, engaged, connected. I can't deal with Gen Z people or whatever it is floating around, or I'm having a tough time with the baby boomers floating around. What do you say to those folks that are kind of in that lull, that are looking to get re-energized? And then in the reverse, what do you say to these new college graduates, MBA graduates that are just getting into the accounting profession, which there's a huge drop in that, right? I think that's declined by like 20, 30%. What do you tell them about, hey, how do you keep that faith? How do you keep moving forward? How do you, how do you define your career path, et cetera?
Yeah, I think there's going to be moments, and I have them, intermittently in my career, where you're going to feel stuck. I mean, that is a normal, thing to happen. And when we're in those moments of feeling stuck, we start trying to find our way out of it, or go in the abyss of it one way or the other. But it's a choice. And really, in those cases, the work is really to uncover how you got there. It can't be me telling you step by step what you need to do. It has to be that you're willing to do the work to uncover why you feel that way. Because, like, using your example, the outward reason is I just can't work with this generation. That's not the issue.
Okay.
Right? Like, it's easier to blame that versus what is preventing me from being open to a different way of working, to shifting my perspective. What is the barrier that's in the way? And being able to allow yourself to get to that point of uncovering that for yourself through, questioning I do and so forth, to help you understand how you got there and how you're showing up. And it's usually not the way you want to be showing up. Like, when you were young in your 20s, and generational shifts have always been an issue. And there's always been generations saying they don't understand another generation, and it didn't feel good. Right. And then somehow, it's funny because I was sitting next to a person at a workshop, and that was kind of what was happening. He was about your age. And all through the day, it was like, yeah. And then I had the staff person request this. And then I'm like, well, why were they requesting that? And getting into it. And he's like, oh, okay. And then later on in the day, he'd say something else. And I said, yeah, but is that so bad? I mean, if they don't have children and they care about their pets, like, shouldn't that matter? You know, like, so,
Right, exactly,
and then at the end of the day, he's like, how did I become a curmudgeon already? Like, he uncovered it by hearing himself, right? Like, sometimes we just have to have that awareness. Like, I'm not going to say that to him. He's got to come to that conclusion to say, I've got to start being more self-aware. And the reason is I'm really busy. I, don't want to disappoint my clients. And the thing is, part of the issue that ends up happening is we know there's certain clients that we need to either raise their price or fire them at a certain point. They just don't fit in the model anymore in order to make this whole culture work better. But then we would flame outward to just hold on to the thing that is bringing me comfort, right? Like, I don't want to have to lose that person or that client, or I don't want to have to shift or change or think about pricing different because that's uncomfortable. I don't like sales. I've got to get into whatever that issue is so that I can really tie into what is it in the morning when I get up? What is the value that I want to create? And am I creating that value? And if I can find even the things that I don't like to do, but I can align it to my purpose and my value and what I want to create in my day, then I can feel better about some of those things I don't love to do, but they actually do align to what I'm trying to provide into the world when I get up every day.
And what about the younger generation, the ones that are just coming out, those young accountants, those bright-eyed, they don't know anything from anything, and they don't seem to be motivated by the same stuff that, say, I'm motivated by. What do you tell them?
Well, I have met with a number of college students, including my son, who is 20 in accounting as well.
Okay.
And hearing all these conversations that are happening. And I always tell them to get to why they want to do this work. Like, it's not just about the work, right? Like, what is, same thing as I would tell any other generation, what is the value you want to create? And when you keep your eyes open, so just using myself as an example, I came from a family of entrepreneurs. So I knew I wanted to help small businesses when I became an accountant. Now, I started in Big Four, auditing. I was in Fortune 500 companies. So I'm not with small businesses that are doing it. But I always knew that during that work, I was going to learn enough to get to wherever I wanted to get to. I didn't know what that looked like, but I wanted to help small businesses one day. I knew I had to get this experience to get there. So if I have a longer term vision of what is the value I want to create, then I know the work that I'm doing today is meeting that in the future. And that may shift. If you're an older partner, it's toward retirement or whatever you're looking for. And then your role is to be of service and to start empowering the next generation to be taking over so you can do your next best thing. But my biggest message all the time to college students is just keep your eyes open. I had no idea what my career would be when I started, but it was a matter of saying yes to opportunities, not no. So even when something was not exactly my skill set, but I had an interest in it, and I'm like, that could really round out some experience that I had, I would say yes, even if I was walking into something uncomfortable or I've never done it before. And because of that, I've been able to have a bunch of different opportunities, and you're not just stuck in one lane forever in your career.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. I'm also a big believer that every single year should be a different year. You should be growing. It shouldn't be like Groundhog Day where like, oh, I just had the same year I had last year. There should be something different going on there. Well, look, I will say this. I think your son is super lucky to have such an awesome mother, and hopefully he recognizes that. Although young people, you never, don't really get that.
We have a great relationship. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming on the show today. If you could just tell us, how do we get, so let's say, for example, my firm wanted to get in touch with you to come in and do some coaching, all that stuff. Will you send us the show note links? How do people get in touch with you? All that stuff?
Yeah. So, main place is amyvetter.com. We also have courses on businessbalancebliss.com. And if you want to contact us, all our contact information is there, and you can follow me on social media at Amy Vetter CPA on all the different channels.
Absolutely. And listen to and I would tell everyone on my podcast, listen to Amy's podcast. It's really cool. Like I said, I'm in the gym, I'm working out, I'm listening to it, I'm on the treadmill, all that stuff. It's fantastic. But again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, Amy. And
thank you so much for having me. It was great.
You're welcome.
You've been tuning in to the Essential Tax Podcast with your host, Mishkin Santa. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on our website, thewolfgroup.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.